Tom's vision blurred as the ship's warning alarms screeched in his ears. He could feel the ship's hull groaning under the stress of its rapid descent. Gravity was no longer a gentle force, it was a merciless pull dragging him towards the unknown. He grabbed the console in front of him, his knuckles white as he fought to maintain control, but there was no stopping the inevitable. The engine was shot, the systems were failing, and the crash was a foregone conclusion. "Brace for impact," he shouted over the loud alarms, though it was more of a reflex than any hope of preparing for what was coming. Tom knew there was no time for any heroic last-ditch fixes. This wasn't his first crash landing, but something about the way the ship was bucking and groaning under him told him this one wasn't going to be a textbook recovery. Outside, the deep blue of the atmosphere darkened as they plummeted through layers of cloud. The ground below was an indistinct blur, but Tom could see jagged mountain ranges cutting across the horizon. Then, the first explosion of impact rattled his body, and the ship crumpled into a fireball of twisted metal. Everything went black. Tom came to slowly, his head throbbing like a drumbeat. He tasted something metallic in the back of his throat and groggily forced his eyes open. His helmet had cracked in the crash, and the comms were silent. The emergency lights flickered on and off, casting an eerie glow over the cockpit. He gingerly touched his head, no blood, but a hell of a headache. His left arm felt stiff, but his fingers moved, which was a good sign. He unbuckled himself from the harness, swearing under his breath as the ship groaned. The walls were askew, and a fire smoldered in the back of the cockpit, but it wasn't going to spread. That was good. Tom pushed against the ceiling to crawl through the wreckage. He could hear nothing but the hum of the remaining systems struggling to stay functional. "Come on, Tom," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. "You've gotten out of worse." He forced open the damaged hatch, but the sight outside was worse than anything he'd expected. The terrain was alien, literally. A dry, reddish desert stretched out in every direction. Jagged rocks jutted up from the ground like teeth, and the sky was a sickly shade of greenish yellow, casting a surreal light across everything. Before he could assess his surroundings further, the sound of rustling behind him caught his attention. Spinning around, he saw movement, a figure, tall and lithe, partially hidden behind a boulder. Tom's hand instinctively moved to his side, but he realized too late that his blaster was nowhere to be found. He was unarmed and stranded on a hostile world, and whoever, or whatever, was watching him knew it. The figure stepped into the open, revealing a lithe humanoid form. The creature was tall, maybe 7 feet, with translucent skin that shimmered in the harsh light. Her eyes were wide and dark, but her posture was curious, not aggressive. Still, Tom could sense danger. He wasn't about to take any chances. "Stay back," Tom shouted, holding up his hands, palms facing her, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. He wasn't a fighter. He was a mechanic, a problem solver, and the last thing he wanted was to get caught in a fight on an alien world. The alien's gaze was intense, but not hostile. She tilted her head slightly, scanning Tom's form as if trying to assess the threat. Finally, she spoke, though her voice had an almost musical quality to it, foreign but strangely familiar. "You are human," she said, her words slow, careful. "Not what I expected." Tom's heart skipped. Her accent was strange, almost melodic. He could tell she wasn't a native of this planet, but her command of language suggested she'd studied human behavior. This could be good, or really bad. "Yeah, human," Tom answered, lowering his hands. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to fix my ship and get the hell off this rock." The alien didn't respond right away. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the wreckage, then flicked back to Tom. There was something calculating in her expression, something sharp. "You'll need help," she observed. Tom hesitated. She wasn't wrong, he was no engineer. He could patch up a ship and get it flying again, but this was beyond his usual level of expertise. His only option was to ask her for help. But asking for help from an alien? That didn't sit right. "I can fix it myself," Tom said, his voice defensive. The alien's lips curled into something close to a smirk. Your ship is not in a condition that fixing it yourself will help. She gestured to the wreckage. You'll need my expertise. Despite his reservations, Tom knew she was right. All right, he said reluctantly. I guess I don't have much choice. The alien's smirk deepened, and she stepped fully into the open, her long limbs moving with an unnatural grace. You can call me Zyara, she said, her voice still calm but laced with an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite read. I'll show you how we can get your ship back in the air. For the next few hours, Tom and Zyara worked in silence, moving between the wreckage and the makeshift shelter Zyara had created near the crash site. Zyara's efficiency was unmatched. She worked like a machine, her hands moving deftly to repair the damaged electronics, connecting circuits, and welding metal like it was second nature. Tom couldn't help but be impressed. She was methodical, precise, and seemed to know everything about the inner workings of the ship, almost like she designed it herself. Tom, on the other hand, fumbled his way through his tasks, his expertise limited to mechanical work. But Zyara didn't criticize him. Instead, she offered quiet suggestions when needed and patiently showed him how to handle some of the more complex systems. As night fell, the temperature on the alien world plummeted, and they retreated into the shelter. It was small, barely big enough for both of them, but it would have to do. Tom could feel the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones, but there was a quiet comfort in their proximity. Zyara's presence wasn't threatening, at least not in the traditional sense. Why are you helping me? Tom asked as he sat cross-legged near a small fire Zyara had managed to ignite. It was a question he had to ask. He was curious, cautious, and unsure of her intentions. Zyara's gaze flicked to him, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Because, she said finally, her voice soft but carrying weight, there is no honor in letting a stranded soul suffer. Tom blinked. She was helping him out of compassion? That didn't fit with what he expected from a species that had no reason to care about him. There had to be something more to it. All right, Tom said, his voice laced with uncertainty. Thanks. But once I fix my ship, I'm out of here. I've got places to go. Zyara didn't respond, but the quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. There were no guarantees, no promises. But in that moment, Tom knew he wasn't alone. And that was something he hadn't expected to find on an alien world. Tom staggered to his feet, his mind racing despite the dull ache in his skull. He was alive. That was the first priority. Now, it was time to assess the situation. He wiped the blood from his forehead and staggered towards the hatch. The crash had done a number on the ship, debris was scattered everywhere, and the cockpit looked like a war zone. There was no getting the ship off this rock anytime soon unless some miracle occurred, and Tom was fresh out of those. The hiss of escaping air and the clatter of metal against rock drew his attention. The emergency door had failed to seal properly, and the ship was leaking oxygen. He cursed and set to work, trying to get the door open enough to assess the situation outside. He pried it open just enough to squeeze through, using the sharp edges of the doorframe to cut through his suit. The air outside was cool, tinged with an unfamiliar chemical scent. The sky was a pale greenish hue with two suns hanging low on the horizon, casting an eerie, unearthly light. It didn't look like any world he had ever seen, and for a moment, he just stood there, disoriented, his mind trying to make sense of it all. He pulled his emergency toolkit from the wreckage, hoping to find something that might help him escape. And then he saw her. She was standing just beyond the wreckage, silhouetted by the twin suns, her stance firm and unyielding. The alien was unlike anything he had ever seen, tall, with luminous green skin and hair that shimmered with iridescent hues, almost like it was alive. She wore a form-fitting suit of silver and blue that seemed to shimmer as she moved, and her eyes, bright violet, glowing with an intelligence he could not begin to comprehend, were fixed on him. Tom froze, not sure whether to approach or flee. His hand instinctively went to the blaster at his side, but the alien woman did not move to attack. She simply stood there, waiting, observing. Her gaze was both curious and calculating. Are you, Tom began, but his voice faltered. He realized he had no idea what to say. What could he say? He had crashed on her planet. She was likely the one who would decide his fate. The alien took a few deliberate steps forward, her movement fluid and graceful, yet there was an undeniable authority in the way she carried herself. "I am Zyara," she said in perfect galactic standard, though there was a strange, melodic cadence to her voice. "And you are fortunate you survived your crash, human." "Ah, yeah," Tom muttered, still unsure of what was happening. "Lucky me. Looks like I'm stranded here." Zyara raised an eyebrow. "You are stranded indeed. This is a militarized zone. You are trespassing." Tom scoffed, his frustration mounting. "I didn't exactly choose to crash here. And it's not like I've got a choice. If you're looking for something to blame, blame the ship's shitty design." Zyara's eyes flickered momentarily with amusement, though her face remained mostly unreadable. "Your survival instincts are interesting," she remarked. "However, I suggest we focus on the more immediate issue, your presence here and the condition of your ship." "Yeah, sure. I could use a little help," Tom admitted, letting go of his pride for the moment. He gestured toward the wreckage. "If you can help me get it fixed, maybe we can both get off this rock." Zyara's expression darkened slightly as her gaze shifted to the wreckage. "That will be difficult. Your ship is irreparably damaged. Even if we manage to salvage parts, there is no guarantee we could make it space-worthy again." Tom's heart sank. "That's not what I wanted to hear." Zyara remained silent for a moment, her eyes scanning the wreckage, calculating. "There is, however, one option," she said, finally. "You are not the only one stranded here. I was sent on a mission to recover valuable resources from this planet, but my equipment was also damaged during landing. I will allow you to assist me, and in exchange, I will help you repair your ship. However, this is not a negotiation, human. You will follow my instructions, and you will not attempt to escape." Tom blinked, taken aback by the offer. It wasn't exactly a deal he would have chosen, but it was better than nothing. "So, you're saying if I help you with your mission, you'll help me get out of here?" "Correct." "And if I refuse?" Zyara's eyes glowed brighter, almost predatory. "Then I will leave you to die here alone. Make your choice." Tom didn't hesitate. He knew he had no real bargaining power. Besides, if he had to deal with an alien, it might as well be someone who could help him survive. "All right. I'll help you," he said, rubbing his temples. "But you're going to have to tone down the 'I'm the boss' act. We're partners, not enemies, right?" Zyara studied him for a long moment, her gaze calculating. "We are temporary allies. Do not mistake this for friendship, human. I have no intention of becoming close to you. You are a tool. You are valuable because you can fix things I cannot." Tom didn't know whether to be insulted or relieved. "Fine, whatever," he muttered, "just as long as we can get something done." For the next few hours, they worked side by side, each taking the lead in their respective areas of expertise. Tom, with his mechanical skills, began assessing the ship's internal damage, while Zyara used her advanced technology to scan the area for resources they could use. The odd thing was that despite her cold exterior, Zyara's presence was oddly calming. She worked with precision and efficiency, her movements almost robotic, yet there was an undeniable beauty in the way she handled herself. In turn, Tom began to notice things about her, subtle things that didn't align with the alien image he had expected. For one, she was methodical but not ruthless. When he managed to fix the ship's auxiliary power supply, she didn't brush him off with a cold "good job" but actually acknowledged his contribution. "Well done, human. You have value after all." That small compliment was enough to make Tom feel oddly appreciated. In all his years of working alone, he had never been given such a direct acknowledgement from anyone, much less an alien. By nightfall, they had managed to salvage enough equipment from the wreckage to start working on her mission. Zyara had set up a small shelter, and while Tom's stomach grumbled from lack of food, he could tell that she wasn't particularly concerned with his comfort. Still, they shared a sparse meal of ration packs, eating in silence, the distant sounds of the planet's wildlife echoing through the thickening air. "Tell me about your planet, Zyara," Tom said between bites, trying to break the silence. "How did you end up here?" Zyara's violet eyes flickered briefly, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to weigh his question before replying, "I am part of an engineering cohort. My people are explorers and engineers, seeking resources to fuel our civilization. This planet was an unexpected detour, and it appears to hold resources valuable to our cause. But it is dangerous. The terrain is hostile, and the creatures here are not friendly. So we're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and there are hostile aliens too." Zyara's lips quirked upward for a fraction of a second. "Indeed. But I will ensure your survival. That is part of our arrangement." Tom wasn't sure if that was supposed to make him feel better, but he had little choice but to go along with it. The night was silent, and though the two of them were far from friends, there was an unspoken understanding forming between them. They were allies by necessity, but beneath that practical facade, something more might be brewing. A trust, fragile but present, was beginning to take root. At least, that's what Tom hoped. But in a world like this, who could say for certain? Zyara watched Tom with an expression of wary curiosity. She stood tall, her angular frame outlined against the strange, amber light of the twin suns, and her deep purple skin shimmered faintly in the low light. Her eyes, black like two obsidian stones, were fixed on him with a piercing intensity, trying to assess his every move. Tom wasn't sure what to think. She was unlike any alien he had ever encountered. Her long, sinewy arms were covered in intricate tattoos, and her face was framed by spiked hair that almost resembled a crown. But what caught his attention the most was her eyes. There was intelligence in them, but it wasn't the curiosity of someone who was trying to figure him out like a scientist. No, her eyes were calculating, assessing, almost as though she was sizing him up for a fight. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sharp and clear, though there was a faint growl beneath her tone. It wasn't unfriendly, but it definitely wasn't welcoming either. Tom hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm Tom. I'm a mechanic. My ship crashed here." He nodded back toward the wreckage. "You?" "Zyara," she replied curtly, "engineer." She didn't elaborate further, and there was an undeniable edge to her words. Clearly, she didn't like being in this situation either, but Tom could sense that there was something more, something deeper, beneath the surface. As much as she appeared to be sizing him up, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was also calculating a way out of this mess. "Right." Tom wiped his brow, trying to ignore the growing tension. "So, I guess we're stuck here together for now. Any idea how we're gonna get off this planet?" Zyara took a step forward, her boots making a soft, clicking sound against the ground as she moved. She paused, scanning the wreckage of the ship with a discerning eye, her posture relaxed but alert. "I could get us out of here," she said, her voice cool but confident. "But first, you need to stop working on your piece of junk and listen to me. The damage is beyond what your mechanic expertise can fix." Tom bristled at her dismissive tone. He wasn't used to anyone talking down to him, especially someone who was stranded on the same planet. "Excuse me?" He stood up straighter, trying to project confidence despite the discomfort in his bones. "I know my ship. I'm not some rookie. I can fix this." She scoffed and turned away from him, examining the ship's systems with a critical eye. "You're welcome to try, but there are no guarantees. We don't have the tools. We don't have the resources. And frankly, we don't have time for your stubbornness." Tom clenched his jaw, biting back the urge to snap at her. He had always prided himself on his ability to fix anything, and he wasn't about to let some alien engineer tell him that he couldn't handle a simple repair job. But as he watched her work, her fingers moving with an eerie precision, he began to wonder if she was right. Zyara didn't seem interested in negotiating. She was practical, methodical, as if she had already accepted the reality of their situation. She began tapping into the ship's auxiliary systems, her movements smooth and efficient. Within minutes, she had access to the diagnostic systems, and her face remained impassive as she scanned through the data. Tom watched her, torn between frustration and awe. There was no denying her skill. Despite the hostility in the air between them, he couldn't help but admire the way she approached the task, her mind clearly focused on finding solutions. He had seen a few engineers in his time, people who could barely tell the difference between a wrench and a socket, but Zyara was something else. She wasn't just an engineer, she was a problem solver, someone who could look at a damaged machine and immediately begin to break down the components in her mind. After a long silence, she finally spoke, though her voice had softened slightly. "Your engine's gone. Whatever you're trying to fix, it's beyond your capabilities. But there might be a way to salvage something if we combine our expertise." Tom wanted to argue, but he could tell she was right. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was no ordinary crash. The damage to the ship seemed almost deliberate, like someone had set it up to fail. Maybe the sabotage wasn't an accident. "Fine," he said, gritting his teeth. "But I'm not working with you unless we make some kind of truce. I don't trust you, and I'm sure you don't trust me. But we need each other if we're gonna get out of here alive." Zyara didn't respond immediately, but after a few moments, she nodded. "A truce, then. For now. But understand this, human, I don't need your help. I'm doing you a favor." Tom nodded back. "I'll take what I can get." The next several hours passed in relative silence, save for the occasional exchange of curt words or instructions. It was clear that neither of them was ready to open up. The tension between them was palpable, but it didn't take long for a tentative partnership to form. Zyara would handle the ship's delicate systems, while Tom would work on the mechanical aspects. He began to realize that there were things she could do with alien technology that he simply couldn't understand, and in turn, he showed her how to fix the ship's propulsion systems in a way that made sense to a human mechanic. As they worked, an unexpected understanding began to form. They weren't the best of friends by any means, but there was respect growing between them. Tom was used to working alone, but there was something undeniably efficient about Zyara's methods. Despite her cold exterior, she wasn't so different from him in her desire to fix things, to survive. The silence between them was broken when Zyara spoke again, her tone unexpectedly softer. "You're not like the others. The humans who've come to my planet before, they always think they know best. They're arrogant. You're not arrogant." Tom glanced at her, his hands still working at the tools in front of him. "I'm not exactly the model of humility either," he said, his voice a little lighter now. "But I'm not gonna pretend I know what I'm doing. This is a mess." Zyara nodded, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of something there, perhaps it was respect, or maybe something more, before she turned back to her work. "You're honest. That's rare. I can work with that." For the first time since they had crashed on this strange planet, Tom felt like there might be a way forward, a way out. But the real test would come when they discovered who, or what, had sabotaged their ship. The tension between Tom and Zyara had only escalated over the last few hours. The crash had left them both stranded in an alien wilderness with no clear way off the planet, and each was struggling with their own fear, pride, and survival instincts. Tom's mechanical skills and Zyara's advanced alien technology might have complemented each other under different circumstances, but here, in the crumpled wreckage of his ship, they were more like oil and water. "What's the plan, then?" Tom asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence that had settled between them after their terse introduction. Zyara looked over at him, her expression inscrutable, her violet eyes glinting in the dimming light. "We salvage what we can, repair the ship." "It's your technology, what do you think we can use?" she asked, her tone impersonal, but there was a flicker of something softer behind the coldness. Tom could tell she was just as frustrated as he was, but he didn't have the energy to be diplomatic. "Well, considering the damn ship's half a wreck and I'm no expert on alien tech, I'd say we're both pretty screwed." He wiped his face, frustration boiling over. "I've repaired plenty of ships before, but this is beyond me." Zyara's gaze sharpened, and for a second, Tom thought she might snap at him, but instead, she said something unexpected. Then we think. Together. You know your tech, and I know how to modify it. He blinked, momentarily stunned by her suggestion. You're serious? After all that back there, you want to work together? I've never been known to back down from a challenge, she said, her voice low but firm. We don't have the luxury of failure. We survive, or we don't. Tom gave a bitter laugh, eyeing her warily. You're a lot more calm about this than I am, you know. You seem to have a lot of faith in your ability to fix things. What if we fail? We don't fail, Zyara answered simply. Not if we make the right choices. There was something in the way she said it that stuck with him. Maybe it was the confidence in her voice, or maybe it was the quiet determination that seemed to radiate from her. Whatever it was, Tom could feel a flicker of something more than just survival instinct. It was the first time she had spoken to him like an equal rather than just an annoyance. And Tom wasn't sure why, but it made a part of him want to give her the benefit of the doubt. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Fine. Let's give it a shot. You take the engineering stuff. I'll focus on what I can do with the ship's mechanics. He walked over to the wreckage, opening a compartment to begin rummaging through the debris. Zyara stood silently for a moment, watching him work. Her eyes narrowed as she observed his movements. He was quick, methodical, much more than a simple mechanic. He was calculating, every action carefully thought out. She had initially underestimated him, assuming that a human mechanic would be little more than a grunt who could fix engines but lacked the mind to think outside the box. But the way he moved now told her that this man was far more resourceful than he appeared. He wasn't just some ship hand who knew how to use a wrench. He was someone who had mastered his craft, who had seen the worst of situations and always found a way through. You're not as foolish as you seem, human, she said, her voice laced with a touch of respect. Tom glanced over his shoulder, catching the slight shift in her tone. I could say the same about you, alien. You're not half bad yourself. That was the start. The smallest of acknowledgments, but it was enough to begin the slow, fragile bond that would form between them in the coming days. They spent hours working in the wreckage, each contributing their unique skills. Zyara's hands worked deftly with the alien tech, her knowledge of advanced systems allowing her to modify the ship's components in ways Tom couldn't have imagined. And Tom? He fixed what he could, using parts from the wreckage to create makeshift repairs and rig up systems that might give them a chance at survival. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And for the first time since the crash, Tom felt a glimmer of hope. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, the two of them stood in silence, surveying the work they had done. The ship was still a wreck, but it was far closer to being functional than it had been when they started. I think it might actually work, Tom said, feeling a strange sense of pride. We might have a chance. Zyara turned to him, her eyes softening for the briefest of moments. We will. You're not as useless as I thought. Tom raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. I'll take that as a compliment. Zyara didn't respond immediately, but the ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Perhaps it's time we stop fighting each other. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The truth hung heavily between them, unsaid but palpable. They were both stubborn, each clinging to their pride in their own way. But in this moment, surrounded by the wreckage of Tom's ship, there was something more, something that neither of them could deny. They needed each other. They didn't have to like it, but they needed each other to survive. Agreed, Tom finally said, breaking the silence. But we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Zyara nodded, her expression returning to its usual stoic demeanor. Yes. We do. They turned back to the ship, their hands moving in tandem as they worked together to finish the last few repairs. The tasks were tedious, but they were no longer just a mechanic and an alien engineer at odds. Now, they were partners, strangers who had been forced together by circumstance, but who were learning to trust one another, however reluctantly. By the time the second sun dipped below the horizon, their progress had been nothing short of miraculous. They had repaired the life support systems, jury-rigged a new power core from the remnants of the wreck, and found a way to stabilize the ship's flight systems. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get them out of the immediate danger. As Sayara wiped the sweat from her brow, she looked over at Tom with something that could almost be called admiration. "I didn't think you had it in you." Tom shot her a grin, a rare moment of lightness passing between them. "You'd be surprised what a human can do when backed into a corner." Sayara raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She simply nodded in acknowledgement of their shared victory. "You've earned my respect, Tom." And with that, for the first time, the unspoken tension between them began to shift. There was still much to do, many challenges ahead, but now, they stood not as enemies, but as equals. And in that unspoken understanding, Tom felt a flicker of something else, a bond forged in the fires of necessity, tempered with respect. The journey wasn't over yet, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was only just beginning.